Welcome to this live where I'll be joined by one of my absolute favorite colleagues, Tawny Lovelace, to talk about the intentionality that severely avoidantly attached people have towards their partners and how it can be very abusive. The inspiration for this topic came from a really great book by Ria Khan called Avoidant Abuse, and I want to bring Tawny on now to talk about it with me because it's such an important point to get across for those of you who are in the thick of it, dating someone who's avoidantly attached, and you're questioning, is this behavior intentional? Is it unconscious behavior? We'll get into the weeds of it very shortly, so I'll just... And hello to everyone who's saying hello from your respective corners of the globe. Right, just sent the invite to Tawny, and here she is. Hey, Tawny.
Hi. How are you, Ken?
I'm really good. It feels great seeing you at the start of 2025 because it just feels like, yep, we're getting the year started right.
I know, I love that. You look great, by the way. You look great.
Oh, thank you. I feel like all this health stuff that I've been working on over the last year has paid off. So, I'm very grateful for the time and effort I put into that.
Yeah, and taking care of yourself, like the self-care, taking off the 3 weeks and stuff. Like, so proud of you for doing that because you know how easy it is to get caught up in this work.
It is. I mean, they don't call it the burnout industry for nothing. And I think that it's one of those things, whether you're a coach, a counselor, therapist, psychologist, you really need to honor your boundaries and take care of yourself because you can't just be overgiving from an empty cup.
Oh, yeah. Self-care is so key. I mean, that's just in general for all of us, but self-care, especially in this industry, and I'm sure among others as well. Looks like we've got a little tribe following us already, so that's awesome.
Yeah, I know. It's always very exciting when that happens. So for those that don't know you or just want to get reacquainted with you, would you like to reintroduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. My name is Tawny. I am a motivational love coach and a certified confidence coach, and I specialize in helping people release the past and get more equipped for high caliber dating.
And for those of you that may not know me, obviously I'm a counsellor here in Sydney, Australia, helping people who are recovering off the back of pretty gnarly breakups, typically with those who have a pretty severe avoidant attachment style, but I also help people work on their attachment styles regardless of where you land on the attachment spectrum. And for today's topic, I know you and we were having a really good conversation about this months ago. Basically, The inspiration for this was, I did a video many moons ago where I basically said, you've got to be aware that some avoidantly attached people absolutely know what they're doing. And you replied something to the effect of, and maybe you're going to do a better job of quoting this than I will, how much that would have helped you back in the day if you had heard that information, rather than just assuming, as a lot of people do say, it's just unconscious behavior. And sure, maybe in some cases, absolutely it is. But no, a lot of people with insecure attachment know what they're doing.
Yeah, and you know what? It's so funny because, that my breakup with my avoider was, a couple years back. And so I'm on this path. I'm healed. I'm great. I'm in a good space. And that video hit me. The video, you were just sharing that. They do know what they're doing. And it took me a long time to that space because in the midst of that storm I was going through, I was so empathetic. I was so I understood, because you understand that person, right? They're a good person. They have all this history. There's past trauma. And it just made me almost, like I always say, it was a red flag of mine. I was too understanding. I was just too understanding. So I let a lot of things bypass. And even though I knew, things like he has to know what he's doing, but it was like, I could brush it off by saying, he doesn't, like he's been through so much and so forth. And when I saw that video, I was like, man, had I seen that video so many years back, it really probably would have propelled me either in the direction I was headed for healing a lot faster, or just got me out of the storm a little bit quicker, because it was powerful, because it was like, it kind of checked my understanding, don't be so understanding. They do know what they're doing.
Yes, and I think this is maybe a good live today, not only to talk about the intentionality of these individuals who are like severely avoidant, but also I think a very cautious reminder for all of us, which is, it's wonderful that we have empathy, but for the love of God, keep that empathy in check, because I think it's so easy for us to wrap ourselves in knots for people being like, oh, I can understand what they're going through. They've had a tough childhood. Haven't many of us. And those of us that have still gone through degrees of adversity, but we're not behaving like that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. We're not behaving like that. Like, we all have our stories, we all have our journeys, we've all experienced, some kind of trauma on something of the spectrum, right? But it's not an excuse to validate the behavior that happens. Like when the silent treatment was happening, during that relationship, I mean, it was hurtful, but I just brushed it off because I'm like, oh, this is how he handles it. And, I'll give him his space, and I understand this is how he's dealing with his emotions because of his childhood, but why? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Why was I so understanding? If I wasn't so understanding, I probably would have saved myself from a few relationships, because it's so easy just to I have a big heart, you know what I mean? I have a heart, and I care, and I see the good in people, and the avoidant experiences, they are great in the beginning. They are really good people. That's why it's so easy to like not see these signs and to bypass it. So it's not like, what I always say, Ken, like, regular breakups is kind of like, it's a little easier, right? Because there's toxicity, or there's something going on, and you're like, society and the world around you and yourself, you're like, I need to leave this relationship, right? Like, if there's this and that. But like with an avoidant, like, the relationship is so great and so phenomenal and so amazing that it's different. It's just, it chops, and then you're done, and you're like, what's going on? So it's a little bit different, where it's not like you thought things were going on the right path, and then they just kind of take, you get blindsided. So it's much different.
I agree. Like, I mean, I think if we, had to build out an example of what this might look like, and I'm sure everyone listening knows what I'm talking about. If you have dated someone who initially is saying all the right things, they're telling you maybe little quirky things like, oh, I'm not really good with love, I might have intimacy problems, and you just sort of brush it off and go, no, you're being vulnerable by telling me this stuff now. That's very sweet of you to think of me. And you date, and, they're withholding from putting a label on it in 3 months in, and you're like, it's fine, I'm just going to give them space, because obviously they're scared to, maybe commit. And you keep doing this for months. And, as you're getting closer together and maybe a relationship label is looming, they might start shutting down. They may even start sexting other people, as a way of getting space in the relationship. And I think, to add a little bit of color to this example I'm creating, this person has had a habit of doing this in previous romantic relationships. This isn't just a one-off. And it goes back to a thing that I've been saying for ages, which is, it is one thing to merely have an attachment issue. Like, if you don't know that you have attachment injuries and this is your first time on the rodeo, I will give you a pass for ignorance. Like, fair enough. But if this is like your multiple time of noticing you do this behavior, and you start justifying it to yourself, being like, well, I'm just like this in relationships, or this is just who I am. I mean, the terrible thing for the person who's dating this avoidant attacher is, it's like, we're left blindsided. We're left feeling completely misled, because none of this information was up front. If we'd known what fear of intimacy actually meant, we might have been very cautious about getting involved with a person like this. So, and I think the thing is that because these people are often, a lot of them are people pleasers, a lot of them are very impression managed.
Yes.
It means that we're left being like, well, what the fuck did we get ourselves into? And then we have to deal with grieving the person we thought we met at the beginning versus the person we're dealing with right now.
Yeah. And I think when you're grieving that part, that's why it's so hard. That's why so many people have more difficulty letting go of an avoidant relationship, right? Because you're grieving. It's not like, again, you're not grieving someone you knew. Like, the person I broke up with prior to this person, I knew who I was, I know who it is, I know who they are, and we're breaking up. But this is like, you're grieving. Like, remember when I told you I felt like it was a setup? Like, this is grieving something completely different. Like, I'm grieving, and it can almost be compared to like when you see someone's potential, right? You're grieving the potential that you saw and all this different stuff. But that is why it's so difficult to let go. And the grieving process, because it's such a blindsided moment. I mean, the ruminating, just replaying, the rewinding. It's like, over processing is also sometimes a way that we avoid healing, so we got to be really cognizant of that, all the over processing and overthinking and replaying it, and then connecting the dots. It's good to process all that, but when you get to the point where you're reprocessing some of the things you've already processed, now you got to kind of look inward and wonder, is it because I'm avoiding moving forward?
Yeah, 100 billion%. And I think that it's one of those things too, where it's very easy for that empathetic part of our brain to color that person and be like, oh, but they're so amazing, you know, like they were really trying in our relationship. They were really trying to, you know, make it work. I know countless people who will say things to me like, but I can't get mad at them because they've had a difficult childhood, you know, they've had their trauma, etc., which I get. I understand where that line of thinking comes from, but it really starts to disempower us because
Yep.
we're giving so much compassion to these people. And I hear some people, you know, almost swing to the other extreme where they're like, oh, well, that person was clearly a narcissist. And they'll say things like, well, narcissists are the only people who, you know, take action with intent. And it's like, no.
Right.
You know, there are plenty of narcissists who don't act intentionally and it's still painful to be
Yeah.
on the receiving end of it. And there are plenty of avoidant attachers who absolutely know what they're doing and hurt people, but they're not necessarily malicious. And I think, you know, the internet, and it's like, even though on one hand it's fabulous for providing this information, I think so many people are trying to oversimplify these experiences by being like, is it A or is it B? And trying to, like, you know, just make the process so much easier to overcome and understand. And it's like, listen, every time I've heard someone's story, there might be similar strokes, but everyone's case might be also uniquely different. And I think that at the end of the day, we could run through the semantics all day long, but at the end of the day, this person did behavior that probably wasn't in your best interests. And how did it feel? That's the easiest part to work on, in my opinion.
Yeah. And we got to stop, you know, like you said, a really powerful thing. We got to stop giving them so much power. We got to stop empathizing so much and showing so much compassion. Because at the end of the day, like, that's why I got to that point where it's like, I was scrolling, I was taking all this in, but at the end of the day, it got repetitive. And I got tired of trying to make sense and connect the dots. And like I said, I understood enough. Like, I need to show myself compassion. You know what I mean? Like, I need to take my power back, show myself compassion, understand that, you know, it's helpful to have, you know, the labels and so forth, but it's also sometimes can be so blended, you know. And a lot of times I work with people who are like, I'm dealing with a narcissist, and they're not a narcissist. You know what I mean? They weren't a narcissist. I mean, it's just so many different, there's so many different things, but I try to stay away from the labels in general. Different when it comes to the attachment style, it's a little easier because we can, you know, we understand it. We can identify for sure, you know, different than a diagnostic tool, you know, or a diagnosis. But yeah, I mean, it's the information overload. Matter of fact, I'm sorry, my cat is like all over here. I'm afraid he's going to dive in front of the camera. The amount of information that you can suck in and consume on Instagram, you have to be very careful about. You have to be careful not to get stuck in that cycle, because you can consume and consume and consume, and you're going to prevent yourself from healing. You're going to prevent yourself. And not all the information I read is correct, Ken. Like, a lot, like I just listened to somebody that was going somewhere like decent and powerful today. I was listening, just trying to see if there was a different take on it. And at the very end, they were like, well, and then we'll talk about reconnecting with your ex, you know, and getting them back. And I was just like, okay, like, you know, I'm not trying to, that's a done deal, a deal breaker.
I feel the same way. Like, I mean, before we talk about like specific instances of avoidant abuse, I do want to just talk about this for a minute. I agree. I think there's like, and I'm not trying to say that, you know, anyone in particular is like the whole, you know, is like the holy grail of, you know, knowledge on this subject, because obviously we all, you know, bring in our strengths and our weaknesses. But I think the problem I see generally in the attachment space is, one, too many people are relying on the book Attached, and that book it's a great beginner's guide, but it ain't the holy Bible for understanding attachment theory. By the way, guys, I can see a lot of you were throwing questions in the chat. I mean, 29 will probably have time for it, but I recommend putting them in the question mark box just because it's a little easier for us to just work through them one by one. But back to the glut of information online. Yeah, I agree. Like, I think that a lot of people, also a dangerous thing too, and I've seen this a lot, are the so-called secure couples who are, you know, trying to talk about their relationship and how they've made it work with their anxious or avoidant partner. It's like, we don't know you. We don't know what makes your story different from mine. We don't know how you've made it work. And also, I think when there are accounts who are trying to cultivate almost like a twin flame narrative of like, we came together and healed each other's trauma. The danger of that is that whilst, yes, on one hand, we can heal our, you know, it's ideal if we can get into some form of relationship to work on our stuff. I don't think we should be doing it to the point where we're seeing behavior like we're being overly understanding of someone to the point where we put ourselves on the back burner. We are in these codependent messes where we're so worried about how it looks versus how we feel on the
Yeah.
inside. And I think Instagram is a place where, in particular, it's very easy to give, to be well-intentioned, but give, frankly, misleading information.
Yeah. And that's why, listen, and everybody, to each his own, but that's why I love your page. You're so very clear. You're very clear on how you articulate your message is. It's very easy to understand. And also I think I caught someone saying like, it just, all the attachment based relationship advice is becoming a lot. And that's, and that's why I decided to take a different turn. Like, we can process things, but I'm really over the hump. Now I want to make sure I have the tools, the skill set, and all of those things can help you in relationships in general, but they definitely would have helped had I had more of those tools when I was in the midst of this storm, because I was just coming into realizing what attachment styles were and how they impacted relationship as well. So it was clearly, while I was coaching about breakup recovery, I clearly did not have the knowledge I have now about, the attachment styles. So get the information, understand the attachments, how attachment styles impact relationships, yourself, other people, and then dive into getting tools so you don't ever have to freaking come back to this point again.
Yeah, it'd be best if you don't actually need to come back to my page, because it shows that you actually have, you've educated yourself enough. You have your PhD in attachment theory and you can live a wonderful life with it. But what I wanted to ask you, Tawny, is in your experience, professional or otherwise, what have been some examples that you've noticed where you're like, this person with, let's say, avoidant attachment for the sake of the topic, has demonstrated behavior where it has absolutely been intentional and there's no there's no about it.
Yeah. I mean, we'll start with silent treatment because that was a very common one, and it's a common one with my clients and with with others that I speak about when it comes to the experience all over with an avoidant. They know exactly what they're doing. I mean, if you have a pattern and they're calling you every morning and you're in a committed relationship, you have a pattern. You have a couple identity. You have a routine. So when things start to, when the silent treatment came about, it was like, okay, the first time it's kind of shocking, right? You're like, well, what's going on here? But then when it becomes a pattern for them, it's like, they're just shutting down. Like, he knew he was shutting down. And I made so many excuses for it. Like, I was, again, too understanding, but that is intentional. Like, we had conversations about it at one point, like, hey, like, when you do this, you do understand this is like abuse. This is not healthy. This is not healthy for you, me, and, oh, I didn't know that. You don't know that causes someone like, anxiety or, worry or any, like, come on, like, you're a smart man. Like, there's no way. I think we give them way too much credit and we give them way too much power when it comes to some of the things they do. So silent treatment was definitely one, because you know what you're doing. And I'm not talking about silent treatment for a couple hours. I'm talking about a couple of days. And I'm talking about, there was a week one time and another week another time. And this was over a 6-year span of a relationship with mine. But you knew what you were doing. I mean, it's clear, you're not communicating, and you also knew when you would, kind of gaslight me as well. Like, gaslighting is another one where it's like, oh, it's your problem. And you start to think you're crazy, and you start to wonder, like, am I asking for too much? Am I asking, like, they put that doubt in your head, but people usually know when they're doing that. Do you know what I mean? They're deflecting. They're trying to get the attention off of them. They're trying to spin it around on you because they don't want to be accountable. I was just speaking to a client the other day and we were talking about, like, it's just so sad. She was like, that we were done and, he's not going to come back. He's not going to come back. I mean, there's a chance, yes, because some avoidance return, right? But in her case, he's not going to come back. And the fact is it's not because you're not good enough. It's because if he knows that, matter of fact, you're probably too good, right? If he comes back, he's going to have to be accountable because you're not going to let shit like that slide, right? So he's going to avoid ever having to be accountable and just leave you alone completely. It just sucks all the way around, but those are some of the, they're intentional about all of it. That's how I feel.
I agree. I've got another example of behavior that's intentional that I'll share in a minute, but just to take a moment to compliment what you said, I love all of that because I think the silent treatment is different from stonewalling in that I think sometimes stonewalling is when someone kind of gets in their head and they don't know how to respond to a situation. It's kind of like the freeze and the fawn response kind of blend together a little bit. Like, I'm willing to give that one a pass and be like, I think that's just a case of someone going through a lot of anxiety and stress. So, but I think the silent treatment, that can be quite weaponized and that can be very, very painful to be on the receiving end of. And I think that what's terrible about that too is someone surely, like, you know, if by someone I mean an avoidant toucher, they would have likely have gone through that at one point or another in their childhood. And it's like, so did that feel
Yeah.
good to you? It's like, why would you do that to another
Yeah.
person? Like, you know, if you've learned this, you know, what makes you think that another person, especially a romantic partner, would like feeling this? You know, it's terrible. And I think it's really dangerous when you've taken on this learned behavior from, you know, people around you, the environment, and you don't question and go, hang on a minute, I didn't like this. Well, why the hell would it be okay for me to do this to somebody else? But
Well, you know,
anyway.
some people continue the cycles and other people break them. So I mean, it's always one of the two, right? You're either going to follow the cycle and carry that on, or you're going to be like, I'm never going to be like that. I'll never do that to somebody. So it's one or the other. But the minute you see that they're going to follow the cycle, especially if you have some knowledge of their history or their childhood, once you see that cycle continuing, you better pump the brakes. You know, you better check in with yourself and ask yourself, are you ready for this ride? Because it's going to be one hell of a ride that you're not going to get off when you want. You know, you're going to have to work on getting off later.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think one thing that I've seen particularly fearful avoidants do more than dismissives do, which would be a behavior that I think is intentional, is when they're very manipulative and controlling. Again, this is the severe end. I know disorganized attachment and fearful avoidance are a lovely big spectrum, and not everyone's like this. But those on the severe end, when they play around with the romantic labels and they're very particular about, you know, how much interaction they want to have with a partner who they're getting into, because they still want to, you know, they want to play the field because they're scared of actually building up intensity with a significant person. Like, to share an example, and this was one that was on the Ken Reads, let's say there's a fearful avoidant woman who's got a very severe avoidant attachment style. She's been seeing a guy that she likes. She's been, you know, saying how amazing this guy is. They've been doing a lot of romantic things together. Then at the time of a birthday, she's saying, oh yeah, I like you like I like a friend. And then she ghosts this guy to get with some random guy that she doesn't even know and starts dating him and doing all this romantic stuff that she was supposed to be doing with the guy she was with previously. Or it might be, say, the fearful avoidant man who's like, well, you know, I just want to play the field. And instead of telling their partner that, they're, you know, online chatting up a bunch of girls. They're not actually being honest with their partner about what's going on for them internally and who they're seeing. And so I think that what scares me is how some of these people really try to have their cake and eat it too.
Oh yeah, I mean that's just it's almost a given they're going to have their cake and eat it too, right? That's their way of like escape. That's their way of like avoiding accountability. That's their way to get their validation. You know, it's not most people. In my experience and my clients' experiences, I mean, this isn't something they just like all of a sudden this is their first time cheating, right? Or this is their first time, you know, with this kind of behavior. It happens, and if you were to talk to somebody else that had a previous experience with them, it's kind of similar. So many. Honestly, I hate to keep saying red flags, but so many red flags I missed. You know what I mean? Like I just. Looking back now, and I think that's where like when me and my clients are processing it, the whole goal is to like, you know, a lot of people want to dissect it, right? And you're so great at dissecting it for me. And I always tell people like I'm really here to help you digest all of this because it's a lot to take in. But it's really interesting when you start reflecting, because when you start putting the pieces together, things start clicking now. Like it makes sense why he did that 2 years ago, or it makes sense why he was in this behavior, or it makes sense why he was, you know, gone for a week, or he would have these work trips or something like that. It always makes sense later on, you know? But the manipulation and the control, I mean, they know what they're doing. And I wish somebody would have told me that in the minute that when I was in that storm, because I just was too fucking understanding. I was just too nice. I was too understanding. I was in love. I have a heart and I cared and it made sense, right? If you like, I didn't have to be a love coach to figure out that like, okay, he was definitely abandoned in his childhood. You know, one of the parents didn't show up as they needed to. Like, I already knew all these things. So it kind of just, you know, that kind of pulls on your heartstrings and gets you soft. And then when the behaviors happen, you're kind of like, but you know, and you're in that soft space. But there's no time to be soft when it comes to, at this point, we have like one life to live and we better do our best to protect ourselves and stop protecting other people and stop giving so much energy to trying to understand what the F happened. It happened. Now, what do we do? You know, how am I going to get through this and get to the other side? Because this can keep a lot of people stuck. I always say, whatever you do, and it's not just with an avoidant breakup, but what you do following a breakup, immediately following a breakup, determines whether you're going to be in this shit for 8 weeks, 8 months, or 8 years. And there's a lot of people who stay stuck. I've dealt with a client who's been doing this for 2 years now. You're still processing it for 2 years. And I was there, like, not in the depths of it, but I was definitely still processing it and still thinking of him every day. And I'm like, why am I thinking of him every day? I know I shouldn't be. I thought I was past this, but yeah, now that I have the tools and I can collapse that time, the more people I can help. Let's keep helping, Ken, because the quicker they can make sense, the quicker they can get to the other side.
Yep. And I want to do a video down the road talking about what the other side looks like, because I can assure everyone who's here, I'll speak for myself. I can't obviously guarantee this for everyone, but I will say, oh my God, life after avoidant abuse is the most incredible thing. Like, I mean, I'll say my life is 10 better than anything I could have ever thought it would have been back then. And it's not because I'm talking about it on social media and I've done well for myself professionally off the back of it. It's more because, like, you learn so much about yourself and you unpack so much. And I think you just understand more about dysfunctional behavior. You also learn, as you're unlearning, I think, a lot of your stuff, you also realize, oh, well, what would make me behave in this way? And it's like, oh, a lot of it's fear. Like, a lot of it's just unnecessary anxiety. And I think that, you know, when you cross that Rubicon, so to speak, you do often find, like, oh my God, like, you know, what did I ever see in that person? Yeah, there were some great moments, I'm not going to lie. Like, I'm so grateful that I went through that experience. But, you know, you level up tremendously, as you would say. Like, you look back and go, I ain't putting up with that bullshit ever again.
Yeah, definitely. Like, yeah, I don't want to take up too much time, but definitely we should do a live on that, because let me tell you something. It is such a liberating space. And I think it's because, you, like you said, you learn so much about yourself. You learn so much about yourself and how you respond to things and how you interact and how you behave in your own patterns and your own blind spots. And you learn about red flags and what you want. And you get really clear. And I feel like that strong sense of self, you're able to trust yourself, right? You're confident in your decisions. You're not questioning. Like, in these relationships, you can start doubting yourself and questioning yourself, and it makes you feel like you're crazy. But the other side is so powerful because you really have a strong sense of self. You trust your intuition. You trust your decisions. I know exactly what I want. I don't even have to, like, people are always like looking for red flags. I'm not looking for red flags. It's just it's like second nature. Like, things just like breeze by and I'm like, yeah, like, it could be a conversation, someone talking to me, like, you know, I bartend part-time, and somebody will be talking and I just catch one little line they say and I just it like clicks and I'm like, yeah, like, I've been this, you know, like, I've been down this road before, and it's like, it's easy to just release. I'm not holding on to anything. So it's so powerful. And at the end of the day, no matter if you're in an avoidant relationship or coming out of a regular breakup, the truth is the more powerful you are, the more powerful your healing process is, the more powerful your love life is going to be moving forward. Like, I can't wait. Like, a lot of people are turned off by this, right? They don't ever want to date again. Their walls are up. It's just a lot of work. They've been devastated, you know, and so forth. But I'm so freaking excited about what the future holds, because I feel like it's going to be pretty exciting. The next person that catches my attention, that has my time or gets my commitment, like, it's going to be so powerful because I'm so confident in where I am, who I am, and what I stand for.
Yep. The way I would summarize it myself is I've become almost so married to my life now, which is not to say I'm close to a partner. It's more just that I'm at a point in my life where I'm like, I'm really, truly committed to myself, my growth, and whatever comes forward. And, you know, I think that it's such an important, and going back to what we've been discussing today, is it's so important to flip the switch and be like, let's stop understanding these people. Let's put the lens back on ourselves and go, what do I need for myself? One thing I see, particularly for those that are more anxiously attached and even those that are secure that get in these messes, is it's so easy to hyperfixate on the what happened in that relationship with my avoidant partner. Were they avoidant? Did they ever love me? Valid questions. But my God, can we spend forever in some of the throes of trying to answer those questions? And frankly, one of the best things you can actually get out of this is actually developing a bit of resilience to uncertainty, meaning that you may never know the full answers of what happened. Hell, I certainly don't. But you can get enough of a picture to be like, yep, I think I have enough answers to be like, I have enough to know what's going on here. Didn't like how it made me feel. I don't have to spend any more time digging around here. It's a good phase of autopsying. I won't deny that. But I think eventually you get to a point where you just become so exhausted by it. You're like, who fucking cares? Like, who cares what personality may have been, who cares what their attachment style was. And eventually, for a lot of you, you'll realize it's actually no longer about your ex. You'll actually get to a point where you're like, it's now actually up to me to fix me out.
Yeah.
And any of the significant pain that I've gone through probably is more to do with my own upbringing than it actually has to do with the relationship that I just had. But anyways,
Yeah.
circling back to, other intentional behavior, I definitely think that actually there were a few examples that I had in my head that I were thinking, oh yeah, this is definitely up there as well too, is the way in which they can be so controlling of intimacy in their relationships, like being so particular about how much time you spend with them. And dismissive avoidants, I think, are much more notorious for this than I think FAs will be, because I feel like with dismissives, they can be masters of just getting so stuck into their hobbies, their jobs,
Work.
and before you know it, you're only seeing your partner once a month.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, you know what, like there, it's so interesting, but like physical intimacy, if you look at a pattern, and again, your own pattern of your times you've been physically intimate with a partner, that was a very different experience. Not to say it wasn't wonderful and wasn't great, but there was a different type of interaction that occurred that was very, like, now looking back, it was like a wall up, no conversation, no nothing. It was just it was like, not that it, in the moment, and I'm never going to say it was transactional, but like, now that I think about the conversation, the lack of conversation and different things that were happening, it was definitely not the same kind of pattern I'd been used to, so it is very much like a control thing now that I look back at, right? If we don't talk about this and we don't talk about those intimate moments, we're not talking during those intimate moments, I can control anything being brought up or getting it vulnerable, because that's where they're going to feel most vulnerable, in that space already. But there was that like real click of like, we're not talking, we just, it's intimacy, done, and then we're on to like the next, like whatever was going on for the day. And it's hard to explain without being totally detailed and graphic here, but when I look back, it's very different. It's a very different experience, and I remember having a conversation like, that's so weird. Like, we don't talk, like, we're not exchanging emotional intimacy during that time. And that was kind of like, now looking back, I'm like, yeah, that was the block, right? We're going to stop right there. We're not going to go to the emotional level, because I'm already vulnerable in this space. So let me get up and continue doing what I do and distance you for a minute, it's interesting. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I appreciate not wanting to get too graphic if we're talking about like sexuality, but what I was going to say is maybe taking a step back from that. I also found too that with some people that I've known in my past who were dismissive avoidant, they would be very particular about the kinds of conversations you'd be having with them. Like, for example, if I was bringing up, hey, I'm going through a difficult time with family, let's change the subject to something completely random. It was so annoying having also just like a complete gut punch, because I'm like, hey, you're supposed to be a close mate and you can't even listen to me talk about something which frankly isn't that, it's adverse for me, but it's not like that adverse. Like, I mean, this is ridiculous. And so, I think what's really frustrating is the way in which you almost, like, if you're dating someone like this, or even in a friendship with someone like this, you gotta be really fucking careful, because it's so easy to feel like you're stepping on eggshells, and it's like you have certain topics which are just like those trigger topics where they're gonna swerve lane, they're gonna change the topic, and you can't even have a proper adult conversation with them.
Or not even acknowledge it.
Yes.
You could be in the middle of like a crisis with your family, or going through some emotional time, and they won't even acknowledge it. Like, I remember times they didn't even, like, if you're crying, I'm over here crying, something's going on, why would you not say, what's up, give me a hug, everything's gonna be okay? Like, where's any kind of interaction? It was like as if they were in the place by themselves, like in the home by themselves. Like, there was nothing happening with me. And it's like, how do you walk by someone and you see them obviously maybe just got off a phone call and I'm upset, or a partner or a healthy interaction might say, hey, is everything okay? Or like, do you want to talk about it? Or like, give me a hug, like anything. But it was just like as if it never happened. So there's like, and that's intentional too, like I can make these excuses and we can say like, oh, there are some things that aren't intentional. Like, I don't think they always do it maliciously, but or do they know what they're doing? Absolutely. Like, what you're doing. You're avoiding the topic. You're changing the topic. And I found that they're very quick to have a solution. Here's a solution. Do it, and we're done. Like, I gave you the solution, so here it is. Like, that's what it is. And it's like, doesn't quite work like that,
No, it's almost like if you're having a it's like it goes back to basic empathy training where it's like, look, most people aren't looking for you to jump the gun and give people a solution. Frankly, most people know what they need to do. They just need time to sit with the shit, to let that pass, and then they're like, right, okay, what do I need to do about this situation? And I think because a lot of avoidant attachers are so left brain, particularly the dismissives, you know, it means that they are much more solution orientated and coming in with an attitude of, well, why don't you just deal with it? Just like move on, just deal with it. It's like, no, that's not how human beings operate. We need time to process what we're feeling, and then eventually we'll do the thing. It's funny, as you were talking about, I know you may not have been thinking about it, but as you were talking, my brain went, oh, that's another really egregious example of something too, which is when they've made their mind about something and they're not actually communicating with their partner and doing something really bad, like starting a new family without you. Like, for example, if you've been in like a long-term relationship with someone who's like a DA, for instance, and you know, things have been a bit bland, on the rocks a little bit, and they're starting like an entirely new family, like they're getting invested in someone new without your knowledge. They're getting invested in that child and that, you know, for this single parent who isn't even part of your family. They're just finding ways to just not involve themselves with the family that they belong to. They're spending far more time actually getting involved in someone else.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can clearly see that what you're doing is exiting this relationship without actually having a proper conversation. And they may justify it in their head being like, well, this relationship was over a long time ago anyways. It's like, who said it was over a long time ago? Like, when do you get to make that decision?
Yeah. Yeah, they're going to find excuses, so they never really have to be the one that says, hey, it's over or done, right? And half the time they don't tell you, they just go. So it's like, it's like crazy. And just for clarification, because if any men are watching and somebody might say, well, men are, you know, solution-based and we are logical. It's a different level of solution. It's like, it's very harsh, it's very cold, and it's very short and abrupt. Here's the solution, that's what it is. And you pinpointed it when you said, well, I remember specifically having something like, well, I deal with my emotions, why can't you deal with yours? And I'm like, this was a perfect like clue for me that said he's always had to deal with his emotions on his own. Nobody ever validated his emotions. So he's like, well, no one was there for me. Why can't you, you know, deal with your own? Why do I have to deal with them? Like, buck up and, you know, be this person. You're, you know, buck up and just be who you got to be to get it done or get it through or whatever. But yeah, it's a very cold, abrupt kind of like, it's not just like, hey babe, here's a solution. Let's try to, you think that might help? No, it's not. It's, hey, here's the fix. We're going to be at the beach. You can meditate for a second. When we leave, you need to be good. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Like, it's very dominating. It's crazy.
It is. And I think that, you know, what's also kind of scary is the way in which there's almost like, I don't know about you, there feels almost like a bit of a rush. It's like, we need to change the topic immediately. It's like, okay, whoa. Like, you know, it's almost like you can sense that they're uncomfortable even just having to think about the conversation that you want to have with them. And it almost comes out at times with a bit of that fight energy where it's like, oh, okay, let's not go here. Don't want to rock the boat. So you almost become trained to just not talk about some of the serious things, like, you know, conversations around health, stress. Actually, this is something that I saw happen in an example with involving a fearful avoidant. I remember my client was telling me that they had just been having some work stress. They would just bring it up with their partner, and their fearful avoidant partner was just like, why are you so angry? And my client was like, I'm not angry, babe. I'm just stressed. There's a difference between genuine anger and stress. And it was just interesting how he just couldn't grasp like the spectrum of emotion. It's like, you know, it's almost as if like, you know, you're being too much. Like, it's just, I can't deal with it. And I can't give you what you're looking for. And I can't, you know, support you when you're going through this. And my client was understandably very distressed off the back of it, being like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, I think you're over-exaggerating my response to a situation and making it seem like I'm being over the top when I'm just being reasonable off the back of what I've gone through. And I think that that leads me on to talk about another thing, which is really painful. I don't know how, like, it's so easy to see how, like, one thing leads to another.
Yeah.
I tell you another thing that's really offensive is when you have particularly boomeranging avoidance, particularly FAs, where they come back and they're so adamant that you are the one for them and that they want to be with you again. And then they say shit to you when you're back into it, like, oh, I really love you, but I think something is missing between us. And I just can't figure out what that thing is. It's like, Do you know how fucking rude that is to
Yeah.
hear, like on the receiving end? Because it's like, I'm putting so much trust and faith that you're not going to break up with me abruptly again, only
Yeah.
for you to say this shit.
Yeah. And it really needs to be reversed. They need to be asking themselves that, right? Like, you need to be, something's missing with you, and that's why we're here. But they're not going to turn around and internalize it. They're not going to turn around and like, they're not ever going to like really, I mean, it's really a blame game, right? Like, it's your fault. You're the reason this is happening. Everything is kind of like, never, no, at the end of the day, there's no accountability to any extent, you know what I mean? Even, I thought about when they start to, when you said like walking on eggshells, and, there's, you don't bring up certain things, and when you do, then it kind of goes left field. And then, they almost train you to get in, because I remember a lot of my clients go through this, and a lot of them it's because they have anxious attachment. But coming from someone who's secure, dealing with an avoidant who then had very anxious moments, there were times where I would be like, oh my God, like, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm just like, you apologize. Like, you avoided those topics, but then there were times you were like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm just like, I can't believe this. And you try to make up for it. But that's almost like you just manipulated me into being manipulative myself. Cause now I'm saying I'm sorry. And while I'm saying I'm sorry, there were a few of those times I did mean it. Right. But then it got to the point where I'm like, while I'm saying sorry, I'm like, I'm fucking saying sorry. And he's the one, like, I would process it like that. Like, I'm saying sorry, but he's the one, like, it just never made sense. We waste a lot of, like, a lot of people feel like I hate to say it, it was a waste of time, right? For a lot of us, this was the healthiest relationship we've had. So there's a lot of good things to take away from it. But when people are like, I've wasted so much time, and, it was devastating. Think of the time you're wasting trying to connect these dots, make it make sense. What is it going to do? At the end of the day, what is it going to do? Now, to better understand it, sure. But once you have a good understanding of it, at what point, what's the agenda after that, right? To keep consuming and keep trying to connect the dots, because now you're choosing to waste time. Where at that point for me, I kind of was just like, I'm done. Like, I've wasted enough time on that. I've taken the lessons. I'm grateful. I have gratitude. Without that experience, I couldn't be me. But now, how do I move past that in a more powerful space, so that I'm not wasting time?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I completely agree. I remember very well when I first went to therapy, my therapist was like, do you want to talk about what kind of partner you had? And I was like, no, I really don't. I was like, I'm done trying to be a detective over this shit.
Yeah.
I just go over the pain. Like, I had enough at that point. I was 4 months in. I'm done. Just tell me how to deep pedestal this fucker. And
yes.
and by that time, I was like, thank God I'd gotten to that point. It's interesting because I will say, for those of you who don't love the themes of manifestation, understand you may not like what I'm about to say, but I had to let go to learn. Like, I realized I had to almost like come to a conclusion that I may not know what was going on. And when I actually started focusing on myself, funnily enough, I was inundated with the answers to what actually happened. Like, I had so many resources like attached that I read. That was a game changer for me when I first read it. I had, lots of clients who were going through similar situations, and I'm like, oh, this is sounding very eerily similar to what I went through. And it was just filling in the gaps. Yeah. But don't get me wrong, I want to make it clear that, coming to my page or other people's pages to learn about this is by no means a bad thing. But you're going to know internally when you're like, I am so done and I'm just tired of trying to think about this person, because what is it serving now?
Yeah, and sometimes, listen, sometimes you got to make that move when you're not ready, right? Like, there was a time where I was like, I wasn't ready to let go, but that's why I had to shift. I always talk about an exercise I do with my clients called wordplay. So let's stop focusing on letting go. Tawny, can you just let it be?
Yes.
Can you let it be with not knowing all the answers? You have some information, some things aren't going to make sense, but can you just allow it to be? And then I had to go a layer deeper and find out what am I afraid of letting, like, what does letting go mean to me? It meant a lot of things. It can, at the end of the day, really, when I think back to what really, okay, one, I had to get past, the hope, right? Hope that this would work out. I had to identify why I don't need this to work out, right? Like, we are not aligned on several different areas. We're not compatible. This is not what I want from a partner. I had to get that through my, like, kind of school first to be like, okay, like, there's no hope. And he betrayed me and all these different things, so I can never go back. So that helped me move forward. But it has to be a decision to let it be. And the question I had to ask myself is, what did it mean? I realized that I thought I was holding on because I loved him so much. Not that I want to minimize how much I loved him, but I was holding on to really, so I didn't have to face my fears about what that meant, right? I was living one place and I'd have to move to another. I would have to, you know, my lifestyle would change. I would have more responsibilities. Maybe I wouldn't like, I would have to face my limiting fears. Like, okay, I'm at this age. Will I ever find true love again? Will I ever find someone who has this connection? Will I ever have to find someone who knows me like they do? You know what, like, oh, I'm gonna have to start over. Like, I had to face a lot of things, but once I faced it, which is kind of going to the place where we got to tell ourselves, we create the narrative. We can either say, this was the most horrible fucking experience I've ever had. Or I can tell myself, you know what, like, this is going to be the most powerful experience I ever have in my life. And it's going to propel me into the woman I desire to become. You know, like, I get to choose now. It's not up to them. I get to choose. So in the midst of all this, it does become less about them. It becomes more about you. So I wasn't really holding on to him. I was holding on to the relationship and who I saw it in a video one time. We're not so much holding on to them. We're holding on to who we were in that relationship. Absolutely. I loved who I was in that relationship. I loved how I showed up. I loved where I lived. I loved what we did. I loved my lifestyle. Like, I loved a lot of those things, but we really got to learn how to kind of separate that from the person, because we put so much power onto them. Like, they're the one that had the key to all of this. No, they don't really.
I couldn't agree more. Like, I think yes to everything that you said. Like, I think to complement some of the things that you said, you know, this is the complicated nature of this. Like, I truly think that a lot of these individuals are very grey, meaning that I think that I can look back at my ex and go, you know what? Absolutely loved every minute I spent with him. It was amazing. It was great. It was very short-lived. And I think that it's okay to honor that and say that was amazing. Like, you know, it was really, really good. And like, I loved who I was showing up in those moments too. Like, I was a very happy, bubbly person, which is not to say I'm not like that, you know, in real life, but it's just, I like that version of myself when I was there. This person felt like a best friend to me. It felt like, you know, a great find. You know, where was I going to meet someone who ticked a lot of the boxes that I wanted when I was that age?
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, it's very easy, particularly if you have a lot of fears, which are very valid. Like, you know, where am I going to find someone like this again? Where am I going to, you know, how am I going to be able to like get over this? Like, you know, it's not just it's just not a regular breakup. Like, it really challenges you. And I think that, actually, there's a really great example of this of someone who's going through it. I don't know if any of you know the user Sprightly. She became famous because she did this great video where she talks about how she dated a guy for several years who said they wanted to be her soulmate, and she moved down to Texas to be with him, only for him to basically handwrite a letter saying, we're just not compatible, even though we've been dating for like 3 years, and you told me that I was the love of your life. And the thing that's really very visceral and beautiful about that, you know, her post-breakup reaction to that is just showing just how devastating the betrayal was, how she's had to try and fight the version of this person who she's had in her head for this entire time. And, you know, it's one of those things where the breakups are completely messy. They make you feel so embarrassing and shameful because it takes you to a very, very dark place. So I think that generally speaking, you know, this can be one of the most humbling experiences you'll ever go through. But we also have to remember, I think, too, like having a, you know, we have to look back and go, yeah, well, I think it makes sense that we're going through this extreme grief because it's betrayal plus we've just lost someone who felt like the love of our life and a best friend.
Yeah, it is. And the grief process is such a, I mean, it's just wave after wave after wave. And you just have to show yourself compassion during that time. It's not like there's a time frame or a timeline on how to get over this. It doesn't matter what you do immediately following a breakup. Absolutely. Are there steps you can take to help it, you know, move a little faster and to, you know, consciously move with intention so that you know you're on the right page? Absolutely. But I mean, give yourself some space to breathe and you know, because I know when I was going through this, I was also, you know, coaching, and it made me feel like, oh my gosh, like, am I a fucking imposter? Like, how did I get in this space? And like, and just the doubt and all of that, and how did I not know? And then why did I settle for that? And I remember at the time, a friend was like, you know, you're a love coach. Like, this is what you're putting up with, this, like, this cannot be. And I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, and she's saying it and she's right. And like, you know, like, it's just a lot to take in. It's a lot to take in. But again, I can't stress it to you. The other side, I would never be where I'm at in the space that I am. Happy if it happens, happy if it doesn't happen, just so happy and so content with where I'm at if I never had that experience. If I didn't have that experience, I might have been in a couple other relationships having some experiences. You know what I mean? Like it could have been that type of experience. But at the end of the day, it does humble you. You know, you get to create the story that you tell yourself, and the story is the most powerful piece, right? So you get to create the story that you tell yourself. So in those moments, you got to figure out what story you're going to tell yourself so that you can keep going on that journey, instead of battling, you know, like this challenge that you are, you know, that you're stuck.
I completely agree. A lot of it is, I think, challenging a lot of those stories. Like, I know I had to challenge a lot of the stuff about what it meant to me because I remember thinking, oh, you know, what does this mean about me?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what does it mean about this? And I think if you're someone who definitely has a very bruised ego off the back of it, it's dealing with failure. It's dealing with like the fact that it's over and that, you know, part of you might be like, but I don't want this to be over. Like, I mean, I'm still very much enjoying this experience as well too. I noticed someone on an unrelated note was making a point saying future faking is one of the most painful manipulations. I have a thought on that. I think that under the theme of what we're talking about today, which is, you know, intentional abusive behavior from avoidance, I actually don't think that a lot of the time their future faking is intentional in the sense that they're trying to like, you know, whelm someone. I genuinely think they're really enthusiastic, but they're just so dysregulated. I just think that they're so like childlike high in the moment that they're like, oh my God, this is great. We're going to do amazing things. Then their fear hits them like a fucking truck.
Yeah.
And then they start pulling all their, you know, intentional behavior to justify what's going on. Doesn't mean that it's not manipulative, like with when you look at it, you know, from a big step back. But that's one of their behaviors that I don't genuinely think is done with any, you know, intent to hurt or to, you know, mislead someone.
Yeah, so there's like a duality to it, right? We're having a conversation about intentional behaviors. It may not be malicious. They were good people. They're, you know, but these behaviors are intentional. Let me share this because this is a question that comes up a lot. It came up for me. It comes up for my clients. I see people, you know, commenting about it. This wasn't listen, I knew my person for 20 some years. This wasn't fake. I believed, I know they were in love with me. I know they were taking engagement serious and that we were thinking of marriage. I know these things. I don't doubt any of that. So, and that could be because I'm coming from a secure attachment, you know, like I'm coming from a secure attachment. I'm coming from, you know, even though my confidence was crushed at the time and different things like that. And there's a level to it that I'm like, I'm very aware. It was very real in the moment because people are like, oh, I feel like, yes, I felt set up, but it's like you said, they had every intention when we were having good times and we were planning our life together and it's talking about the future. That was intentional. I feel like they were moving with intention. That's what they wanted to do. But when it hit that point where it became stagnant, where we're gonna hit that block, we either go deeper or it falls off, right? Because they have that fear. That's what happens. So there's never going to be a time where I don't think people get in these relationships and say, oh, I'm going to do this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to play her. I'm going to show up like this, and then I'm going to pull out the last minute. You know, it's not that kind of, it's not that. They are great. Like a lot of them are great people. They're easy to love. They're easy to like. It's just like you said, it's a fear of intimacy. It's their childhood trauma. It's unresolved emotions. It's dysregulation. They don't know how to handle things. They don't have the same level of coping skills that you may have. But at the end of the day, like all of the good times we had, very intentional. I know all of that. But on the duality, there are still things that came up throughout the relationship that were intentional and hurtful, you know?
Yep. And I think that's what makes these things so interesting also when you're going through it with a little bit more objectivity and you're not so emotionally attached to it, because you can look at it and go, yeah, you can almost read it so much easier when you're not as attached to it, because you're like, oh yeah, I can see exactly what's going on there.
Yeah.
And I don't have to personalize it as much as well too. And, you know, it's sad, it's tragic, it's unfair. And I remember actually recently when I posted that video about the intentionality of avoidant behavior, I know someone on Facebook got into a froth saying how unethical I was for, you know, betraying the confidence of avoidant clients and talking about this. I'm like, and they were also saying like, occasionally some people will come online and be like, are we just trashing people with mental health problems? It's like, no, to neither of those things. The fact of the matter is, yes, we all have at times defensive patterns of behavior that we act intentionally and it can hurt other people. But I think there's a difference between someone who's aware of their patterns and working on it versus someone who just continues to do this because it's very self-serving. And I think it doesn't mean that these people are malicious. It's just survival strategies, but it doesn't mean, this is the key thing, that you have to put up with it.
Yeah, and I think you made a key point. They're in survival mode. It is like survival mode. That it is. I don't know if they ever come out of survival mode. Everything was survival mode when I look back at it. It was survival mode when it came to like finances could be okay. We were still in survival mode. There were different things happening, but it was like he was operating from a space of fear, and he was operating from trying to in a survival space because that's all he had known. So I mean, again, we can be as understanding as we want to be. We can tell whatever story, in the midst of all this. Trust me when I say, like, I remember thinking like, oh, I'm not enough. He doesn't want me. Like, this is not real. Like, he lied about everything. Like, I went through all of that too. I'm just sharing that on the other side, when you step back and you've had your healing journey and you're on a different path, you can look back and a lot of it makes sense. And you can be grateful for the wisdom you've gained and the knowledge that you're going to carry from here on out, because you're going to be able to make wiser decisions. You're going to feel much better about where you're at. And you're going to understand that this was an experience. This isn't about, like Ken said, this isn't about like dogging anybody that has mental health or chopping up to say that the avoidant ain't shit when it comes to relationships. It's none of that. This is just an experience that like many people have, and we have an understanding of how attachment impacts relationships of all kinds. And you're always going to have people online, Ken, that are going to come at you different ways and sideways. I know I get that a lot in my inbox every now and then. I'll get someone that's so pissed off and like, how could I be saying any of this stuff? And I'm just like, wow. And then I'm blocked. I'm like, okay.
For me, I'm just like, I just sort of roll my eyes and go, whatever. Like, it is what it is. Occasionally I'll get someone who, takes a jab and I'm like, ugh, that hurt. And I didn't really like receiving that.
Yeah.
But you're right. It comes with the landscape. And I'm of the opinion that I'm like, look, I know a lot of avoidant attachers are working on themselves. And I got to say, I've worked with a lot of avoidant clients and I fucking love them. Like, they're amazing people.
Yeah.
But my philosophy is, if you're someone who, okay, I'll give you some micro and macro examples of the stuff that I don't like. I don't like when, for example, you're dating someone in a small situationship who knows intentionally that they're not answering your text in a timely manner because they're avoiding you because they can't deal with the growing intimacy and they're not communicating that to you. To me, I'm like, that's just fucking annoying. And we see that all the damn time in the lay data. A more extreme example, I don't like when you've been dating someone or seeing someone in, let's say, an extended situationship who just keeps playing you. Let's say you're having an affair with someone where the avoidant partner is married and they're seeing you on the side and they've been doing this to you now for like, I don't know, 20 years. And, they keep telling you, oh, we're going to be together, we're going to make it work. But then when push comes to shove, they chicken out, ghost you and make you feel like, terrible, because up until that point, in their messaging, which you could look back and say, oh yeah, that was future faking, they were genuinely interested in you. They were like, oh my God, this sounds amazing. Let's do this. Let's resolve any conflict when it should arise. And then when push came to shove, they couldn't do it. And so, the point simply is that I just don't respect people who just aren't willing to take a hard look at themselves and challenge their own shit. Because then, if you're choosing to live in survival mode, it's not a get out of jail free card for hurting other people.
Yeah. It's not anything like, and listen, understand what that looks like, and you understand that it's so easy for it to be, to not align with your core values or to have it be a deal breaker. It makes dating, listen, moving forward, I know people are scared to get back out there. How do you date somebody and how do you know if it's going to be great for 2 years and they're going to turn into avoidant? Trust me, you'll know. You've been through this experience. You have the knowledge. You're going to see the red flags. You're going to be able to identify certain things. It's so much easier. It's just so much easier because of this experience that I've had. So, I mean, yeah. It's just dive in and reflect on how you can take the pieces and put them back together to build you up and move you forward. Yeah.
Correct. It is essentially making sure that Humpty Dumpty never has to go through another big fall quite like that again. So that way you don't have to rebuild yourself that way too.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Tawny, do you have a few spare minutes to just go through some questions, or are you in a rush today?
I'm in no rush. Go for it.
Amazing. Well, it looks like we've got 11 questions so far. So hopefully we won't be too inundated, but why don't we go through some of these?
Sure.
Okay. So starting from the very bottom, I've realized I can actually press these now and they show up on the screen, which is great. What is the core or primary reason why someone would end up with an avoidant attachment style? Tawny, would you like to answer that one?
I was actually going to say you can answer this one. This is what you do.
All right, fine. I'll answer this one. So basically what we see is that people with either a fearful or a dismissive avoidant attachment style have suffered extreme emotional neglect. Now, what makes you go fearful versus dismissive could just be down to a variety of factors. Dismissives tend to be the kind of people who've grown up with very emotionally absent parents, or a very overbearing, emotionally incestuous parent. So someone who's basically tried having an adult relationship emotionally with their child. It might be the kind of family where emotions just weren't talked about. You've probably maybe been sent to a boarding school, and your overall attitude has developed into, well, no one was there for me emotionally. I just had to learn how to deal with it myself. Why can't everyone else just deal with it themselves too? And you kind of develop like mad depression off the back of it. Like you are seriously depressed, but you may cover it up with a lot of jocularity or being very charismatic and trying to be the life of the party. Now for the fearful avoidance, generally speaking, they have gone through a lot of adverse experiences when they were younger. They've usually had the neglect or the emotional incest, but they've more often than not had a lot of chaos. They've often had, parents who were drug dealers, addicts, narcissists. Like they're no stranger to trauma, and they usually have developed more empathy as a consequence, but they're very selective about how they use that empathy depending on the situation they're in. But I gotta say, they are fantastic at understanding psychology. They really are very aware of a lot of stuff going on, and it's a huge, beautiful spectrum of people. Like they're very, very cool to hang out with and to get to know. Which is not to say dismissives aren't either. Like I've got some great dismissive friends, but yeah, like I think it really depends from person to person, but that's generally like the recipe for it. And look, there may be some nature stuff in there too, like genetic factors, some environmental factors as well. We can never rule those out, but that's generally what we see as the bases for this kind of attachment development.
Well said, Ken. See, no, that wouldn't have been my spill. This is why you do what you do and I do what I do. I'm like, whoa, I knew you had it, but I'm like, yes, this is exactly why.
Well, maybe I'll give you one that's more dating specific, because I feel like you being the queen of the red flags means that you're very good at being like, oh, yep, I know what this is.
Yeah.
So, I've got a great one for you. So let me just take that one off if I can. Okay,
I
that
love
one's...
it and it shows up. I didn't know you could do that.
I only realized this the other day, and I had like a moment of epiphany with my audience, and I was like, oh my God, this is great. This is so cool. So this is a double one. So I'm going to pull out the first part and I'll read the second part for you. Okay. First part is, he said he wasn't good at relationships or feelings. Also that he's always been like this. He's 55. Now let me just quickly grab the last part of this. And doesn't go into new relationships while being aware make it abuse. Yes, it does, in my opinion.
He's self-aware. Let's give him that. He's self-aware and he's telling you who he is. This is where your discernment becomes, this is where discernment shows up. This is where you get to make a decision so you don't have to learn a lesson later. So, anytime, like Ken said, I think earlier in this conversation, it's when someone says they're not good at relationships, this is always how they've been. That's clearly pump the brakes and step back. But yes, I would say if they know this, then I feel like, yeah, they're intentionally telling you this to see if you're okay with it, because they're about to, take you for a ride.
Yep.
And it'll be one of we could say abusive, emotional abuse, just all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Completely agree. I've nothing to add to that one. And I've got a great question for you, which I think is so relevant and great. How do you move past the fear that they'll show up better for the next person? What if the next person is more chill or easygoing and the avoidant finds that relationship more manageable? Such a great question.
Yeah. So make sure I'm understanding. How do we avoid running into the same issue again? Is that pretty much what we're saying? How do we avoid dating someone new and finding out they're avoidant again? Is that what we're saying?
No, the question is more, how do you move past the fear that your avoidant ex is going to find the next person more manageable than yourself? So It's that fear of like, maybe I was too needy, maybe I was too emotional, and the next person they're going to be with is just going to be more chill, secure than me, and I just wasn't good enough for them. So in other words, it's that fear of like, maybe I wasn't discarded because they overreacted. They discarded me because I was too much.
Yeah. And it's okay to be too much. It's okay to have standards. It's okay to be who you want to be. Like, let me tell you something. Let them go ahead and do that, because the next person just isn't going to hold them accountable like you did. And I don't know about you, but in a healthy relationship, accountability matters. And I want my partner to be accountable. So rather than focus on, oh, what if they find another partner? The focus is still on them. Why? We need to be like, oh my gosh, this is an opportunity for me to find someone who is more accountable, who does have the same standards of love that I have. This is an opportunity. This is where the story you tell yourself is really key, because again, we're focused on what if they find someone else. That next person more than likely is going to go through the same. Matter of fact, I can tell you, mine actually did go through that. I saw something that came about my attention, and I'm like, oh, I'm sure that he's pulled the same stunt with her, because you could tell there was like something happened, like an avoidance happened or a disappearance happened or something. It just came through social media and happened to do that. But they're going to repeat those patterns. If let's just say they left and all of a sudden they're married now, they're going to get married, and this is the life that you thought that you were going to have with them. Let them, because you don't want that version of them that really is them. That's not the version you want. You want the version that you've been fantasizing about, the one that had potential, the one that you thought the setup. Remember, this is not who they were. So you want that person with your idea of who they were. That's not who they are. So let them, and focus on the story you're telling yourself, period.
I love that so much. Just to complement what you said, I also, in addition to saying just like let them,
Yeah.
is to be like, okay, worst case scenario, they do get with someone who they find more manageable. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't mean anything about you and the relationship. Like, I mean, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to have the depth and fulfillment that you
Yeah.
were experiencing in that relationship. Maybe their capacity for either of those things is actually far smaller than they were capable of actually, sustaining. And they actually can only be with someone who is, at a different level to them. Doesn't necessarily mean the next person is bad, is, this, that, or the other. But I think at the end of the day, like, maybe for them, their relationship needs are far smaller. And if you were to look at that relationship, you might look at it with critical eyes and be like, man, you are much happier with me than you were with this person. But if you're satisfied with this, more power to you. Because at the end of the day, that obviously serves you. I want something more expansive.
Yeah, and it comes back, and again, listen, it comes back to, obviously our confidence has been messed with right now, right? Our self-esteem, our self-worth is all questionable. Like, this is where pouring into yourself really matters. Getting back to feeling good again, so you can ooze fucking confidence to the point where you're like, it doesn't matter where they go, who they're with, because I know the experience I provided. I know how I showed up in that relationship. I know who I am, and I also want more. And it's okay to want more, So they're probably going to be okay with mediocre, and they may meet someone who is okay with mediocre as well, and they can have mediocre. I want more.
Yeah, I love that, and I completely agree. And I think, mediocre for them might be stellar for them.
Yeah.
Amazing, wonderful. That's just not what I'm after. And
Right.
those of us that are on the other side of the attachment spectrum, anxious, even fearful, avoidant, secure, many of us don't want, a emotionally desolate relationship. Maybe
Yeah.
there are plenty of avoidant attachers out there who do really well in less emotionally involved relationships. Hey, more power to them. I'm not going to yuck your yum, but it's just not for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you got to think that person may be just as dysregulated as them. Maybe they aren't very emotional. So you have two surface level people, their lives work, their routine, they're on autopilot. Hey, that works. You have to know yourself well enough to when you know yourself that well and you know exactly what you want, you really don't care where they're going, because the fact is no matter what, they were never going to align with where I'm at and what I need.
Yep, 100 billion%. And you're not on that train anyways. So, get back on the train of looking for someone who I think is actually more aligned with you.
Yes.
So, have another one here. This is a great one. And I think this is another one that's perfect for you, Tawny. So, do you have any advice to work on giving yourself more compassion? I always struggle with being too compassionate or understanding to others. And I definitely notice I put my own self on the back burner because of that. To me, that already reads like the fawn response, but without going too much into that. Tawny, would you like to answer this one?
And may deliver this message a little different. For me, showing myself more compassion, because it's not so much that I didn't put myself first, but like just with being so understanding towards my ex and not being more understanding of myself when it came to like, I'm human. Like, I'm a love coach, but I'm human. I can still, make mistakes. I can still bypass red flags. I can still, you know, play around with fire sometimes. It doesn't mean that like I'm immune to any of that. As far as showing myself more compassion, I had to start with small things. I'm someone who is very much used to be a perfectionist. I had to check myself on that. Where can I let things go? I'm very someone who is like, maybe you can relate. Like, I started with small things, like, okay, like I'm someone who wants the dishes done and my house clean before I go to bed, right? Like, it's not just always about the relationship. When you're building some of these skills, you have to apply them to daily things that we do on a regular basis, so that we can practice and they can become more of a lifestyle. But the fact is show myself compassion. I just worked, I bartended all night. Why at 2 a.m, do I really need to do the 4 dishes that are in the sink? Like, they'll be okay until morning. Like, there's little things you can do to show yourself compassion. But again, it's always going to come back. If you want the more powerful route, it's always going to come back to what you tell yourself. I can either beat myself up and be like, oh my gosh, like, I'm just not enough. I shouldn't have done that. I should have said this. I should have said that. Or I can tell myself, you know what? Like, you showed up the best you could, and you were there, and you held space, and you were accountable, and you set the tone for a healthy example of love. Like, it's the story I tell myself that's going to be most powerful. And it's the same with like the dishes. I can either tell myself they need to be fucking done, so when I get up in the morning, I'm not, stressed out and I don't have to worry about cleaning the house. Or I can say, look, Tawny, you worked all night, 4 dishes isn't going to hurt you. It's a story you tell yourself. So check the story you're telling yourself. And anytime that negative thing pops up, a negative thought pops up, you don't get stuck in it. You instantly have those, like, honestly, it's best to write them down so you can have role play. So you can have, write them down so you know what you're saying. Because a lot of times people are like, well, I don't know what to say in that moment. Well, write it down. Write the moments where you have these negative thoughts. There's a reason they tell you, collect your negative thoughts, and then beside it, write something more powerful, an affirmation or something. So now whenever that happens, I do check myself. I can check myself and what story I'm telling. And instead of getting stuck, it releases much faster. It's more of a fleeting thought.
Agree with everything you said. Just to add to what you said, I was actually thinking of, it's funny, as you were saying that, it took me back to when we did one of my favorite lives I've ever, probably the best live I've ever done with you, which was when you said one of the most healing activities I ever did was write down all the ways my ex didn't show up for me in the way that I needed him to, the icks, the things that weren't great. And I know you said you had like a small book by the end of that. Like, I think one of the things that we tend to do is have a negative bias to ourselves because we've pedestaled this person, maybe unintentionally, it just happens, it's normal. And I think one of the best things you can do is definitely do an ick list of them. And huge thing for yourself, and this is me speaking as a counselor, absolutely address your own inner critic. It is so normal for many people to have a raging inner critic that's telling them, well, if you were less needy, they'd still want to be with you. And it can get even worse when you're looking at content on avoidant attachment, because generally the advice is give them space, don't be needy, make sure that you're emotionally okay. And our brain starts to say things like, oh, well, clearly the reason it didn't work out was because you didn't give them space. If you just given them space, everything would be fine. To which I'd say, did your partner declare that they wanted space in the relationship? Did your partner articulate this was an issue? Did they have boundaries where they said, they need X, Y, Z? And chances are, I'm going to be honest, highly likely they did not, because most avoidant attachers do not usually communicate this stuff up front, because that's part of their wounding. So how are you expected to know? And leading to what you were saying about being more compassionate with yourself, it's like, you've got to set the standard for being like, unless, I didn't do X, Y, Z, or just like meet the bare minimum, which is just express what I want, what I need. Why the fuck am I beating myself up over the fact that I did the bare minimum to try and make this work? I'm not Jesus. I'm not, psychic. I can't, see what they're thinking and they're feeling unless they tell me. And they're masters of often, compartmentalizing their stuff. And so if they were expecting you to show up in a certain way and they didn't tell you that, that is on them, not on you.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought the listing up, because that is one of the most powerful tools I use. And I used it for myself. And it's funny because I used to, when I was just a breakup recovery coach, I would tell people do this list. I never really had a breakup. I needed to do a list. So I would tell people this is what you should do. It's powerful, because I experienced more powerful writing prompts in other areas of my life. But when I went through this with my avoidant, like honestly, that list was key. And I always tell people, it's not to be petty, but if you need, like, but list the petty things if you want to, because it's not about being petty. It's a reminder for in those times of weakness when you feel like you want them back, or you should go back, or you're being that negative critic, right? So it's a list of all those things. And I think I told you, well, I was just talking about my client, we're talking to my client the other night, we were talking about the list, and I told her it's really interesting when you're in the midst of the storm and you're making this list about all the negatives, how the incompatibilities, how they didn't show up, or this time in the, the truck where you were crying and they didn't respond, all these different moments, right? When I reviewed that, I think it was probably within the last year when I was going through my computer. I think I talked to you about it. I was cleaning it out and I realized how long it was. When I reviewed that, Ken, there were two things that I didn't put on the list that were the most impactful parts of the relationship that were negative, that like those were two experiences we had that really impacted me and like hurt me, and they weren't even on the list. So it just lets you know that the blinders that I had on, even when I was making the list and it was like 3 pages long and whatever. But I read that back and I'm like, how did I miss the two main things that were always a problem? I didn't put that on there. So you do kind of have blinders on even in that midst. So it's always good to kind of come back and check yourself and come back. But yeah, show yourself compassion. It's huge. It's going to be part of your self-care.
Yep. And it will definitely support you going forward in so many areas of your life, which links back to it before, which is this ain't just a breakup recovery, it's like a full life makeover off the back of it.
It really is, because you know what, like with that list, I would always think, and I'd read that back and I was like, why did I think, like, there were so many incompatibilities, as great as they were and as fun as we had and the great life we created together, there were so many incompatibilities that I just allowed myself to override and bypass. So that list is critical, and so many people will talk about it now, but the difference between your healing journey and whether you're on board to heal or not is whether you do some of these things that we were telling you to implement. Because you can listen to as many podcasts and take in scrolling posts you want, but until you actually like implement some tools and do the work, you're going to struggle to get past this.
I completely agree. And I think that, you can't be the same version of you that went into this, because that version was smashed to smithereens. And just like Humpty Dumpty, it ain't getting back together again quite the same way. Mm-hmm. We need to really help you, and you need to help yourself, obviously, to come back to who you are as version 2.0, if you will, because the person that you were off the back of that, I know a lot of people feel a lot of grief over the fact that you're not going back to who you were, but you're going to be someone different, and frankly you're going to be more resilient. You're going to be much more, you will find joy again. You're not going to be cynical and depressed. That's not the goal, but you'll just have a very different outlook of things. You'll probably be more measured in reality, and it's going to look different. Now, I did find a great question, which I was like, oh my God, this is 20s, like, this is all up 20s alley, which is about red flags. And I know before we jumped onto this live, you were saying that you can identify, people who are avoidantly attached now much more easily than you could have like years back in the day. So this person asked, what are some dating app profile red flags? Do DAs and FAs tend to have different indicators? And I was thinking, this is one for Tawny.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, right? Because it's a dating app. It's not like we're already in conversation with them. We're checking out their dating app. But what I do find for me that would be a red flag is sarcasm in their profile. Sarcasm is often a deflection of trying to, accountability often sometimes. Like, don't get me wrong, some people have sarcastic humor, but when you stick around and learn people, they're sarcastic for a reason. That humor gets them out of a lot of spaces they don't want to be in, and to get by without being accountable. So sarcasm will often show up in the profile, whether it's a comment they make, whether it's a comment or statement they send you, whether it's their open-ended questions that you can have a comment to engage in conversation. Sarcasm is one. Number two, they don't really share anything on their profile. They're not sharing anything. And this is more for like dismissive. Ken might have more for the fearful, because again, fearfuls, they do have great conversation. I mean, they know how to have conversations, get deep, and have these conversations. So that might be something can help. But as far as dismissive, yeah, they're not going to share anything too. Most of the time, I don't find a lot of dismissives on dating apps. It's really interesting because it's like they don't want to even put themselves out there. That already says so much about them. But when they are, they're not sharing a lot. It'll be very basic. And then when you have the conversations, really for me, the dating app is less of, I'm not really looking for that. The red flags aren't going to be as prevalent or relevant in the profile. It's when the conversations happen. You know, like, are we going to FaceTime? Are we, you know, how quickly are they moving with intention? What kind of questions are they asking me? When I ask questions about them, how open are they? So it's more in the conversation that you'll find your power. But because you had this experience, you will be able to tap into that a lot easier.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think to add to what you've mentioned about DAs, generally I found that the guys that I've dated who've given me dismissive avoidant vibes have been very upfront about the fact that they're not good texters and not to expect much from them in terms of texting early on. And it's almost written like a personality trait. It's like, oh, I'm just the kind of guy who doesn't text much, and I sort of roll my eyes and go, next. The other, I agree with you though, that a lot of people who are dismissive don't tend to put much content on their profile because they're trying to keep it very intentionally vague. They don't want to share about themselves. But
you won't find in their apps. Listen, if you're on an app and you're trying to be intentional about your love life, you're not going to find, the DA is not going to have looking for a long-term relationship in there. Usually they're not going to have a label in there. They're not going to have that at all. So, and then along with like what Ken said, they're not big texters. They're going to let you know that ahead of time. Anything that takes away accountability, right? Anything that holds them responsible or to a certain level of standard, it's just not going to be there.
They'll also probably drop the fact that they have a demanding job and they just don't have a lot of time to give to someone they're seeing. And it's almost like they're telling you up front, you're going to come second to last in terms of priorities and just not to expect much from them. The other one that I've noticed as well too with FAs, there's a few things I've noticed. One is very, very flirty exchanges online. And it's almost like they lead with being like, hey, sexy, hey, handsome, hey, beautiful. It's like, shut the fuck up. Like, I mean, I've just barely known you. Like, I don't need this amount of flattery.
Yep, like they already know you. Yep.
Yeah.
I can. Yeah.
And for me, the reason I can pick that up is because I know a lot of fearfuls have a tendency to lead with the more promiscuous side of them first, because often that's how they've grown up being appreciated and loved by other people. They may also display at times very intense anxious-like behavior in their texting, where they might be messaging you all of a sudden like 9-10 p.m. at night and, you know, retracting some of that later on in the morning, being like, oh, I'm sorry if I came across too needy. I will tell you, no anxious attacher has ever, in my experience of dating, ever been saying the words, I'm sorry if I came across as being too needy. Often a lot of anxious attachers are very reserved in the beginning of dating and then escalate as things go on, in my experience, because they're often so scared to be showing like they're too much. Whereas I think fearfuls tend to be very, like, there's an intensity to like the communication that's there. And usually when you're looking at their photos, their lives look about as, you know, intense and chaotic as their texting.
Good to know. Good to know. Yeah.
That's generally what I've noticed in my experience, but keen to hear if anyone else has noticed that. And I think and I've seen a lot of people, you know, who find the fearfuls actually very engaging, because they are, like, you know, they're very, you know, there's a lot of chemistry there. There's a lot of, you know, intensity, and they're very funny for a lot of the time. But, you know, once you've been around, you're like, okay, don't want to go on that merry-go-round again.
Yeah, and I think a lot it's dating apps. Listen, dating apps are hard to because you can sit here and say, oh, because he's not sharing all this, he's a dismissive, right? So I really do try to stay away from like dating profiles. While I help a lot of my clients with it, it's just a really it's they're either leading with intention or they're not, you know. And it's not so much whether they're avoidant or they're you know, a fearful avoidant. You know, any of the red flags we're sharing are going to be red flags in general, whether someone's avoidant, fearful, whatever. It's just things that, like, okay, they're busy with work, so do they have time for a relationship? I mean, probably not if you're looking for something serious. If you just have to be, whether or not they're intentional or not. But the signs for me always pop up in quick conversations. You can pretty much kind of figure that out.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you've said. I think at the end of the day, we could go into the weeds about what shows up early in dating, but it doesn't necessarily mean to say they have a attachment style that you need to
Yeah.
worry about. I mean, they could be avoidant, they could be, fearful or dismissive, but they may actually be great partners. It just depends on, how things develop. I often say that, energy never lies. And I think that, if you suss it out and you just feel it, you can usually get a pretty good grasp as to what's going on very early on. But in saying that, some of you, I think, may find that it's better to just kind of trial, see how this person is. Do you, it's a question of like, how do you feel about this person? And sure enough, in a short matter of, minutes, a few dates, you'll quickly figure out whether or not this is right for you.
Yeah, which really comes back around to knowing yourself, and this experience you're having with the avoidant can help you better learn yourself. Like, I know you're at, like, a lot of people are at that intensity level of like, I just am so scared to like fall into the same trap again, right? But that's because you're in the midst of this right now. Like, you just had the experience, more than likely. If you really build and focus on yourself right now, building your confidence up, your sense of self, and just taking the lessons from this experience, you don't have to go into the dating apps with mindset. It's kind of like when people would read my red flags book and they're like, oh my gosh, all I keep seeing are red flags. I mean, are you looking for red flags? Like, I wrote the book, but I'm not out there going red flag, red flag, red flag. Is it a note? Like, is it a bring to my awareness? Yes. But is it really a red flag right then? Let me figure that out. And I will do that by another conversation or a more in-depth conversation. So if you find that you're trying to, pick it out from the beginning on a dating profile so you can, save yourself the time, energy, and stuff, I would say you're probably not ready to be dating, because you want to be secure and confident when you are, and you don't want to have to, you're going to be moving from a space of fear, and you're going to attract exactly what you don't want. So if you have a fear of running into that again, you have work to do on yourself, period.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, to be honest, for me, I'm not scared of dating avoidance, because I'm just like, oh, another one. I'm like, it's just like, when it happens, I'm almost relieved when it happens, because I'm like, here we go. It's just sort of, it saves me time and energy, and I'm just like, I'll still enjoy the date, like I'll still have a good time, but I'm not gonna like invest that much emotionally, because I'm like, okay, like, we'll see how this goes. Which is not to say that I haven't been impressed and enjoyed my time with guys that I've dated who are avoidantly attached. I haven't. Like, I've had many great dates with people who are avoidant for a reason. But I think at this stage, I'm not scared, because I know how to handle it. And I know that if they pull away, it's gotten, provided I do my job at being as secure as possible, chances are it ain't me. Which is not to say I don't have work to do on myself, but usually, much of the time, I just don't personalize that behavior anymore. And if it is something I've done, I'd like to expect that the person has probably, brought it to my attention, and it's a reasonable thing for me to work on.
Yeah, and you're moving from a space now of more security, right? Because like, when we are moving from a space of fear, everything is questionable. Everything we doubt, even how you feel. You're not basing. At that point, you're moving from a space of fear. There's already a wall up around your most authentic self. You're going to attract something that doesn't align, that may be toxic, another fearful avoidant, another dismissive. Like, work on yourself to get to a space so that you are confident and secure, and you're kind of like where me and Ken are. It's just, dating is not challenging. I mean, we're not going to say it's perfect, but it doesn't have to be challenging, because we know ourselves so well. We are in a space where we don't move from fear. We're able to operate out of security and knowledge and wisdom and past experiences. So
yeah, I completely agree. And I think, going back to the theme that we've talked a lot about today, which is the story we tell ourselves, like, I mean, a constant one that I always ask myself is, how can I make dating fun for me? Like, how can I enjoy it? And I think that that's, one of the more, pleasurable aspects of this experience is being able to just, find ways to enjoy the process without being so caught up with the outcome of it all. Like, oh my God, when it was outcome focused, my brain would just fixate on, that's an easy way to get pedestaled. Like, that's an easy way to start pedestaling people and to start thinking, oh, we're going to be together forever. Amen. Like,
and that's how most people are dating, though. Most people are dating with the outcome, with an expected outcome. They're looking at the person, even when they are like, oh no, I'm just dating for fun. They're still sitting across the table thinking, is this person someone I could end up with? Your train of thought in that moment should be, how can I learn more about this person to see if they're a better fit for me? Are we enjoying our time enough where I might want to go out on a second date? Is this fun? Is this enjoyable? Do they pour into me, or are they draining me? You know, like, is this compatible? Like, people make dating such a complicated process, and it's really not, I mean, I'm not saying every person is going to be a 10-star, you know, like quality, but dating doesn't have to be that difficult. It doesn't have to be difficult, and it can actually be a fun experience, and you can enjoy your season of singleness if you're doing it with the right mindset.
Completely agree. And I mean, you can still grow and learn so much. That is from my experience of being single. Like, I mean, people I think assume that, you know, we have to like all be in relationships, and maybe that's a conversation for another time. But the reality is that, you know, you don't have to, you know, you don't have to make relationships and dating mean as much as society expects us to make it, because at the end of the day, you know, you can find a lot of richness in life by being
Yeah.
single, even though we live in a world which pedestals being in a relationship, which is, it's, you know, again, a topic for another day. I really have found a lot of satisfaction in being single, but I respect that not everyone is the same as me. And everyone obviously has got different journeys and desires, and that's totally fine and reasonable.
Yeah.
But I really think that our culture's obsession, the global culture's obsession with being in relationships, is unhealthy.
Oh yeah, if we could take that obsession away and just allow ourselves to naturally be ourselves, show up as we are, enjoy the process. I mean, dating is really getting to know yourself better. I work with a lot of women who have went from anxious and now they're insecure. Now we've worked with each other for a couple of years. They're out here dating, having experiences, and they are loving their season of singleness. And every time they walk away from a date, they're like, you know, it used to be like, oh my gosh, like so heartbreaking and so draining. And now they're like, you know what I learned on this date? Like, they always come back with more information, more data about themselves, and they're like so empowered to keep dating, which is so exciting to see that.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I know for a while, like when I was dating quite a lot, that was the experience I was having. I was coming back being like, oh my God, I learned so much about this. That this actually, true story. So the the first video that really took off for me, that blew up on TikTok, was actually inspired by me dating a guy who I know for a fact has a fearful avoidant attachment style, and we're still mates and we still interact. But I'll never forget it, because there was just something in that dynamic that made me think, wow, I can recognize something here that I didn't before. And it was the intensity of the experience alongside, you know, the fantastic chemistry we had. But I remember even like when I took that experience and put it on social media, you know, that's when things just
Yeah.
exploded for me. But I remember it being such a learning experience, because I was like, wow, I don't have to choose the high chemistry experience.
Oh,
And that was the message that I wanted to convey, was that, you know, just because you have a great time with someone doesn't mean it's necessarily always a smart decision to be with that person.
absolutely. You'll be compatible with a lot of people in a lot of different areas and have chemistry. That doesn't mean they're a great fit for you. You know, a lot of people forget to even consider lifestyle. Maybe a great person, you guys are compatible, but guess what? When it comes to lifestyle, quality time spent, what their routines are, sometimes that's not, I mean, you have to know yourself so well that you can make wise decisions on what's going to fit and fit for you and be comfortable. So, I mean, the overall goal is to listen. Two things I can say: get your solitude so fucking sweet that the next person, like my I love my solitude. I love my season of singleness. I wouldn't give it up for nothing. You'd have to be something super super sweet. Like, you got to add, like, you got to be sweeter than my solitude. So that's all there is to it. And if your solitude is that sweet, you're always going to make, you know, conscious decisions and move with intention. The other thing I wanted to say was just kind of like left field, out of, like, this is about, you know, a lot of people going through breakups and avoidance. What I wanted to say was, I just said this to my client the other night. A lot of times we're like, how the breakup was so bad, right? The breakup was so bad. How could this happen? There's no closure. It was blindsided, all this. And I just said to her the other night, and I've seen it be quoted somewhere before, but it's something that helped me. It was super powerful. And I always tell my clients, I know for me, and especially a lot of my clients I'm working with, the breakup had to be that bad, Ken. Like, it had to be that bad, because any other way, if it would have been any softer, any less dramatic, any less hurtful, I would have probably never left. And it wasn't the relationship for me. You know what I mean? It wasn't fitting. It wasn't showing up to be a healthy relationship like I needed. So it really had to be that bad. So hopefully just that little perspective shift can help people out there. Listen, there's a reason sometimes breakups are bad. It's so we don't go back, you know?
Yep, I completely agree. And, you know, I'm a little bit sadistic as a counselor in that, you know, I find that because the nature of these breakups are so shocking on us, whether it be they broke up with us abruptly, you broke up with them because you couldn't handle it anymore, there is something very powerful about going through a romantic rock bottom moment with this, because, you know, when you have a rock bottom which just devastates you like this, yeah, no one's having fun in it. I respect that. But my God, the amount of growth I've seen clients, you know, with my team and I, who've transformed off the back of this experience, like, I kid you not, it's like a night and day shift in so many areas of your lives. Like, you'll notice that you look at things so differently. Like, to give you a few examples, you'll pick better quality friends for yourself, and you're not going to put up with bullshit from friends who are just flaking on you all the time. You're probably going to re-navigate your relationship with family and realize, oh yeah, don't want to necessarily engage maybe in the same way that I was there.
Yeah.
And I want to have, you know, maybe I want to actually do some proper healing work there if it's at all possible, and actually have a stronger relationship with my mom, my dad, my siblings, whatever. You may find that you end up actually quitting your job because you're like, that was not a fulfilling job for me. I actually need to focus on fulfillment for me too. You know, you'll find that time almost collapses and you're like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I really need to embrace this period of deconstruction to construct something that's actually meaningful for me.
Yeah, it's a very moment for sure, you know, and which way you pivot is up to you, but it's definitely kind of, it takes you back, brings you back. I mean, it's kind of like, it's like the military, it like beats you down, right? And then it rebuilds you. Like, it rips you of everything you've known, because it's such a mind-boggling experience, but it also allows you the ability to create something so much better. So yeah, I would not take it back. I mean, a lot of people be like, oh, I never want that experience again. Neither do I, but I don't regret that one at all, because who I am because of it, I love this person now. You know what I mean?
100%. I mean, it's funny when you made the comparison to the military, because I was like, yeah, it gave me PTSD too. But fortunately, I'm not out at bars drinking till the wee hours of the morning, or, you know, having any major, you know, addiction issues off the back of it too. I'm just mindful of time because I've got to get on with a few things today. So I was going to say, why don't we answer one more question and then we'll round out our live today.
Sure.
So we've got a really good bunch here as usual. Oh, here's a great one. It's, you know, a really respectful, like, I think this one's really good for a lot of people, particularly those that I think, you know, might be in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, where they've got well-intentioned people telling them, hey, why don't you start dating again? And to politely tell these people to shut the fuck up. I thought this was great.
Well, you politely tell them to shut the fuck up. No, I'm kidding. You know, that's so interesting. It's not so much why don't you start dating again for me. It's always been like, why are you single? And it's like, if I want to get married, I get fucking married. Like, it's not finding a husband. I'm looking for something different. I'm looking for something that's soulfully aligned. I'm looking for something completely different. And I think you can kind of start there, like practice and figure out what line feels most comfortable for you. For many years, I didn't know what to say when people were like, why aren't you married? Why are you still single? I'm just like, oh, how do you explain this shit? You know what I mean? Like, I'm so tired of that question, but it just came down to, I know what I'm looking for, and I'll know when I find it. And honestly, I'm not looking for marriage. I don't need to get married. I am looking for a soulmate, you know? And so I think when you think about people with family, friends are like, why don't you start dating again? You can just be like, look, I'm open. To shut that down. It's more like saying, I'm open to dating. I'm open. I'm just not actively dating. That's all there is. I mean, you're open to it. You're open to it, or naturally, organically happening. But are you actively on dating apps? Are you actively going on dates? You don't have to be. Like, you just have to be okay with where you're at. I think it's crazy when people ask that question, because again, it's like that societal norm of like, you're supposed to, dating is supposed to be like this, and it automatically has to lead to marriage, and it has to, at this point, I mean, it's hard for me not to be real and just be like, politely, I would probably tell them, I'd politely tell them it's not, you know, like, luckily you don't have to worry about it. You know, like, I have humor when people ask me questions like that. Like, luckily you don't have to worry about it. And trust me, you'll know when I am. It'll be amazing. Like, just come up with what feels natural to you, but don't let it define who you are and feel like you are less than because people keep asking you. Honestly, it's really how you want to, you know, phrase it.
I'm on the same boat as you. Like, I think for me, fortunately, I don't get asked that question at all, which I'm actually really grateful, for the reason that I'm just, occasionally a friend will be like, hey, how's everything going with your dating life? And I'll be like, you know, like what you're saying, I'm open to it, but I'm not exactly like racing to be with someone. Someone the other day was like, oh, you know, are you seeing anyone at the moment? I'm like, no. And I think the key thing for me is internally, it actually felt good to say that. I didn't feel a panic. I didn't feel
Yeah.
like, oh my God, be out there. I was just like, nah, like,
Yeah.
I'm okay. And I think that, I know not everyone's going to feel that way, and that's totally fine. But also, I just think if someone is so desperate to ask that question, it says a lot more about them than it does about you, that they are more, you know, they're more caught up in what is expected versus just being like, hey, are you enjoying this period of not actually having to worry about any of this stuff? Truth be told, I actually think if you're approaching dating from a perspective of whatever will be, and you're still intentional, but you're not necessarily coming from a place of, as you said, fear, anxiety, panic, you're in the best place to be, open to dating because you're much more grounded, you're more aligned, and chances are you probably meet someone organically as well too, just by living life. So, yeah. But short, if I ever had someone like that and I wasn't really open to the question, I'd be like, respectfully, don't really feel comfortable answering that question. But generally, I'm going about it in the way that I feel is best for me right now. That's probably
Yeah.
how I.
And it's kind of like that. It's a reflection of the person asking. Now, who's asking? What's their agenda? Why do they care? And honestly, if you feel like some kind of, anxiousness off of it, or you feel like it's defining you, or you feel like it pokes at you, then it's honestly just another indication of like, where do I need to like pour into myself? Because it shouldn't really, at this point, I could see where I might have been sensitive to it years back, but I'm in a space now where like, I'm happy with where I'm at. So again, my joke will come out or something will be funny about it, but for the most part, really a reflection of them.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I know for me, I can speak for myself and say any time I felt panic, it was because I was putting an unnecessary timeline on myself where I was needs to be done by 35, 40, this, that, or the other. And I'm like, as soon as I got rid of that and was just like, yeah, I could be with someone in my 60s and it still wouldn't really bother me too much. I'm like, great. Because when I think about it, the sort of stuff that I want to do with my life, I'm not yearning for stuff that I would do with a partner. I'm like, I can do most of this stuff myself and live very well. Again, that's me. Not everyone's the same. But, I think, like I said before, we put way too much pressure and timelines on ourselves for this.
You've got social media that sits here, and if you go on Threads or anywhere, see something, some people be like, oh, if you're over 40 and she's never been married, there's a problem. Really? Like, who says that kind of stuff? Like, I mean, society has there's a lot of shit going on, a lot of stuff we can consume. So it is crazy, but that's why you got to have a strong sense of self. So it doesn't, I mean, yeah, I'm somebody's ex and look at me, I'm fantastic. Or like, you know what, like I am over 40, never been married. It wasn't the plan. You know what I mean? That's why, like, there's so many different ways, and there's just different perspectives in the world today. But it's just so sad when people continue to kind of like encourage those type of conversations where it makes people feel less than, like, fuck off,
Yeah. What's really funny too, and this relates to our topic, and it's a good place to sort of end on, many avoidant attachers are actually in relationships. Like, the irony is so many of them are in relationships. Some are better than others, but a lot aren't. Like, as someone who's seen many couples where there's clearly an anxious and avoidant dynamic, and hey, the anxious person can be doing their shit too to make the relationship miserable for everyone involved, including the kids. I gotta tell you, I would much rather be single, having really done a lot of due diligence working on my attachment style with the relationships that I have in my social circle, than be in a relationship where I'm confused as hell as to what the fuck is going on. I'm burying my head in the sand trying to pretend like nothing's happening, and it's just miserable.
Well, it's really difficult is, you could be in a relationship, you have the opportunity to leave, right? Nothing to attach, no ties really a lot of times. I mean, obviously kids may be, something that keeps you connected, but do you know how many married women reach out to me? I have so many married women reach out to me and say, I'm sure you just, yeah, I believe I'm in a relationship. I'm married to an avoidant, but they've been married like 15 years, 20 years. And it's like, okay, so that's a different conversation we have to have, because you have been there for 15, 20 years. But my heart goes out to them because I'm like, I can't imagine being in a relationship with someone who's avoidant for 15, 20 years. Like, yeah, it's just a difficult place to be.
Yeah. And also, I will say, as a child who's had parents with insecure attachment, it's no fun if you're a kid either. Like, I mean, I have seen many people in similar situations where they've outright said, my parents should have broken up. They should have been, working on themselves, with what facilities were available for it back then. And I think the danger is the fact that if you go into marriage without having these, the awareness of this, or even relationships before marriage, you're really at high risk of an unsatisfying relationship and doing unnecessary damage to children in the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. So many different topics we could spin off of this, Ken. You and I could talk for hours.
I know. And don't get me wrong, I want to talk for hours. It's just that I also have some other things that I need to take care of today too. But yeah, thank you so much, Tawny, as always, for being part of this conversation, because this was really great. So just as we're rounding out here, I'm just going to advertise on your behalf as always and say, if you really like listening to Tawny today, please go check her out, because she's fucking brilliant at what she does, and she will definitely help those of you who are struggling with your breakup to get to the stage of moving on. And I know, Tawny, you said to me, Tawny's not the person to go to if you want to get your avoidant attacher back. It's very much the person you go to. You're like, we're done and dusted. We're here to move the fuck on.
Yeah, when you're ready to step into like your fiercest self, like when you're ready and you're like, you know what? And like I said, you don't always have to be ready. I knew it was timing. Oops, excuse me. Sorry. When you're ready and you know it's time to move on, you just have to. You know, there's no other choice or option for you, and you're ready to feel good again, and you're ready to step into your fiercest self, and you want to be equipped to be your fiercest, most powerful self, so you can have, you know, this breakthrough, this breakup turn into a breakthrough. Yeah, I'm your girl.
Yes. And I'm also transparency thinking about bringing Tawny as part of the team, so that way if you want to reach out to her, it's like you know that she's available and taking on people as well too. So highly recommend you check her out too. But other than that, Tawny, it was so good seeing you again at the beginning of the year, and we'll keep in touch because I've got to do an recording with you as well too.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Thanks for everyone who tuned in. I love the fact that we have this community. I love that we can, you know, support one another. And it's always something to talk about when it comes to this experience. So I'm just grateful that Ken always shares his knowledge with all of you and shares his platform with me. And I'm sure we'll all be in touch. See you soon. Thank you so much, Ken.
Thank you, guys. Catch you around for the next one.